Tomorrow is a special day. In fact, tomorrow, if you're not aware, is a national holiday. Tomorrow is Groundhog Day. It's maybe the weirdest holiday we have as people, because it's the day where we allow for a random groundhog in Pennsylvania, of all places, to tell us whether or not winter is going to be longer or shorter. Now, I love winter. I really do. It's my favorite season of the year. But I tell you, if that groundhog finds its shadow, I'm going to put it on the grill. I'm done. We're good. So, anyway. But it is a weird holiday if you really think about it. But the one positive thing that we can say about Groundhog Day is that it has at least given us one of the greatest comedic movies of all time, Bill Murray's classic Groundhog Day. If by some chance you have made it this far in life and you have not seen that movie yet, first off, what are you doing? Secondly, let me summarize it a little bit for you. Bill Murray plays a weatherman who is sent to Puxatawney, Pennsylvania to go and cover the Groundhog Day events and festivities there. And somehow, some way, he is made to relive that day over and over and over and over and over and over again. At no point in the movie are we told why is he having to relive this day, which is kind of frustrating when you really stop to think about it. Like, nobody ever tells us what was give me something, some line of narrative or dialogue that says this is why, but we don't get that. But it's okay, because Bill Murray, we get to watch him as he has to relive the same events and have the same conversations with the same people over and over again. And the hilarity of the movie is watching this man slowly go insane, having to have these same conversations with these same people saying the same things over and over. Now, my entire life, after I watched that movie, I always thought it was a very funny movie, but it wasn't until I became a parent that I discovered that that movie is very, very relatable. I say that because for the better part of the last 13 years of my life, I have had to say the same things to the same two people over and over again. And one of them is trying to hide her face right now. Yeah. Now, here's the thing. I have had to repeat so much to my daughters that for a long time I threatened to record myself saying the same things over and over again and just play it in their rooms as they slept, in the hopes that maybe it would sink in and I could stop. But I've learned over the course of time, like, there are only certain things I seem to have to repeat over and over again. I've never ever had to say twice, hey, let's go get some ice cream. They hear that one every time the first time. But I oftentimes find myself having to repeat things like, don't leave the lights on when you've left a room. Don't use the stove when mom and dad aren't home. And don't run in the house in just your socks. The things that I've had to repeat over and over again have all been rules. Rules in our household. And the thing about those rules is that those rules are there for their safety. They're there to kind of protect them from having to face any negative consequences that might come from doing things like leaving the lights on in a room, which is the negative consequence there is the higher electric bill. I didn't understand that for a long time when my dad kept saying, turn off the lights when you leave a room, and then I got my first electric bill and went, oh, got it. But, we use these rules as a way to try to protect them from facing consequences in their lives that are negative. But after a while, I get tired of having to repeat those rules, and I kind of reach the point where I come to the conclusion that the only way they're really going to learn is the hard way. Take, for example, a few years ago, the house that Mandy and I were living in with the girls, we had these solid oak wood floors pretty much throughout the house. And while solid oak wood floors are absolutely beautiful flooring, it's also very hard. And the finish that you put on top of these floorings can be kind of slippery if you're doing something foolish like running in the house with just socks on. But at the time, Robin and Adrian seemed to be in a hurry for absolutely everything in their lives. And so I had to constantly remind them, don't run in the house, don't run in the house. And finally one day I said, I'm done. Truth be told, I like a little chaos from time to time too. And so I decided to stop repeating myself. And it didn't take a whole lot longer for them to learn the consequences of why the rule of don't run in the house with socks on is there in the first place. One night, Miss Robin, who at the time was 8, 9 years old, something like that, decided that she was in a really big hurry to get to bed before bedtime. And so she ran from our kitchen all the way to her bedroom, which is in the exact opposite end of the house from us. And she was running in the house on these solid wood floors with only her socks on. The dog that we had at the time, our special good boy Rudy, special in quotation marks, I miss that boy every day, but he was a doofus. He heard her running through the house, and he went to go investigate what is the sound that I'm hearing, and he stopped her short in the hallway of our house. And Robin tried to do her best to stop before she ran into the dog, and her feet went out from underneath her, and she hit that floor hard. Hard enough that the sound of her hitting the floor reverberated throughout the entire house. Again, she was 8 or 9 years old at the time, and she was trying her best to hold it all back. But it wasn't too long before the pain became so great for her that she started crying. And she went to our couch that was in the living room right out of the hallway, and she just laid down on there to weep in pain. Understand, the reason why Robin was crying in that moment was because she was facing the natural consequences of a choice that she had made. She knew the rule. She knew the rule. I had explained it to her a million times. So she knew the rule was not, don't run in the house with just your socks on, because it was going to prevent things like this from happening. But now she is living with the natural consequences of that choice. And I went to go investigate the sound that I had just heard. And so she heard me approaching her. And she did what comes naturally for a kid who's just broken the rules and doesn't want to be found out. She threw a blanket over herself, trying to hide from me. Make no mistake, I was not happy that the rule had been broken. Right? I had to tell those kids 10 million times, don't run in the house with your socks on. So I was not happy that the rule had been broken. I wasn't happy about the million other times they'd broken the rule and avoided the consequences by the grace of God. But now my kid is crying under a blanket. And I love my kid. And so I went into the room, and I know that she was worried that I was going to add to the consequences that she was experiencing in the moment, but instead, I took the blanket off her. I scooped her up in my arms, and I just held her. And as the pain began to subside and the tears started to dry off and Dad was able to wipe away the ones that were left, she calmed down. And it was in that moment that I reassured her just very calmly, hey kid, it's not a good idea to run in the house with just your socks on. And this is why. I didn't give you that rule because I'm trying to stop your fun. I did it so you wouldn't have to face this. And she told me in a very weepy voice that she was sorry she had broken the rule. And I told her she was forgiven. I kissed her on the forehead, and I sent her to bed. I would love to tell you that was the last time Robin ever ran in the house with socks on. They don't do it quite as often now, but they still do it from time to time. Just to get our other dog now, Louise, riled up, it seems like, which is always fun. But in that moment, Robin had to face the consequences of the choice that she made, because there are consequences to every choice that we make in life. Every choice, every action has a consequence to it. In the beginning, God created everything. Everything that we have seen, everything that we have not seen, God made it all. And yet, out of all the creation that he had made, the one that seemed to be the most personal, the one that he seemed to love and cherish more than all the others, was the creation of man and woman. It was the most personal and intimate of the entire creation narrative, was when God decided to create humanity. And as he placed them in the Garden of Eden, giving them an entire world to literally use as their playground, he gave them one single rule. That's it. Just one. Don't eat the fruit of this one particular tree. Billions of other trees that you can go and be a part of, that you can go and enjoy what they have for you there. You can go and explore the entire world. It is literally your playground. Just don't eat the fruit from this one tree. There's no fear. There's no pain. There's no death. There's no clothing, which means there's no laundry. The two of them were more free than we could ever hope to imagine. But like we talked about last week, in Genesis chapter 3, which is where we're going to be today, so make sure you get there in your Bibles or on your Bible app, along came a serpent one day. And the serpent asked a question of Eve that I believe played off of her natural curiosity. He asked the question of why that one tree? Why is that rule in place? He didn't question the rule itself. Rather, he questioned the motivation of God to give them this one and only rule. He was cunning. He was convincing. And it sparked something within Eve to not just be curious about the fruit of this one tree, but to even find it desirable. And so even though that she knew it was wrong, even though she knew that there was only one rule that God had given them, even though she knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that this was the wrong thing to do, as we pick up the narrative exactly where we left it with the rest of Genesis 3, verse 6, it says, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. She knew this was wrong. At any point in this entire experience with the serpent, she could have put a stop to things, but she didn't. She could have walked away from the situation entirely, put distance between her and the tree that she knew she wasn't supposed to be around in the first place, or at the very least not supposed to eat the fruit of, but she didn't. She knew that she shouldn't, but she did anyway. Now here's the thing. I've heard, I don't know, at least a dozen or more sermons that have at least referenced this particular part of the creation narrative. You probably have heard more than a few yourself, I'm going to guess. Unless this is your very first Sunday in a church, in which case, welcome. We're really glad you're here. And in every single one of those sermons that I've heard, all the blame is thrown at Eve. And justifiably so. She deserves her fair share, to be certain. But I've heard as some ministers have completely just dragged her name through the mud for making this choice. And I'm going to guess that you probably have as well. But it sparks a question in my brain, at least. Where was Adam? Well, according to verse 6, right there with her. Meaning at any point in time, Adam could have been the voice of reason and said, hey, hon, I know what he's saying makes a lot of sense, but God told us don't do this. Yeah, but he didn't do that. At any point in time, he could have said, shut up, snake. But he didn't. He could have slapped the fruit out of her hand saying, what are you thinking, woman? But he didn't. And instead, even though they knew it was wrong, they ate it anyway. And in a moment, in an instant, everything changed. And make no mistake about this. We have talked about how free they were. We have talked about the world that they lived in with no pain, no fear, no death, nothing. The things that you and I worry about weren't even a thought to them. In an instant, that freedom, gone. Never to return. It didn't give them the result that they were expecting. If you recall from last week, the snake had told them that if they eat of the fruit, that they would become like God. In my estimation, probably the part that was the tipping point for them, right? To be able to become like God. Who doesn't want that kind of power? Who doesn't want to have that kind of authority? Who doesn't want to be like God? But that's not what happened. And in fact, verse 7 tells us exactly what happened when it says, then the eyes of both were opened and they knew that they were naked. They sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. Instead of this fruit making them like God, all it did was reveal to them that they're not even like each other. And so in the moment when they did something wrong, it's kind of telling that the first thing they try to do is cover up, right? Understand, this is so much deeper than what we see on the surface. Right? Whenever we hear the story of the creation of Adam and Eve, and we get to the part where it says they're naked, we kind of all giggle like kids, like, they're naked. Right? We kind of get fixated on that because nudity is weird for us because we're prudes. Let's be real. But we're not just talking about a physical nakedness here. These two were naked to their very soul. At no point in time since their creation did the two of them ever feel the need to hide anything from each other. We've elaborated on the freedom that they experienced. We've also talked about the relationship that they had with God and how deeply personal, how deeply intimate that relationship is. But we lose the fact that so was their relationship. That at no point in time did they ever feel the need to hide anything from each other. Right? Ladies, have you ever asked your husband, you look at him one day and you go, what are you thinking about? I'm going to tell you, we as dudes, we hate that question. But the response you're likely going to get is nothing. Guys, I'm sorry. I'm going to spill the beans. The reason we say nothing is because likely is what we're thinking about in that particular moment is so dumb that we're worried it's going to change your opinion of us. Sorry, fellas. These two, in the moment that they bit the fruit, they did not just lose their innocence. They absolutely lost their innocence, but they also lost their intimacy. They also lost the intimacy that they had with one another, the connection that they had. The first thing that they'd ever tried to do was to cover part of themselves up. And ever since that moment, that's all we have done, is try to hide things from one another. The two of them lost their intimacy with each other, but they also lost their intimacy with God. Again, I don't think I can ever really express to you how devastating this had to be, because the relationship between God and man is now forever changed. We can't, no matter how good of a Christian that we can be, no matter how much we can try to follow after Jesus, no matter how much we can do all the right things and do all the right worship songs, and no matter how much you get those holy goosebumps when the worship song hits just right, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We will never have the kind of relationship that these two had with God. Their relationship with God was so very intimate that in the moment immediately following the bite, when they heard the sound of God's approaching, do you know the kind of level of intimacy you have to have with somebody to just know the sound of them walking towards you? I'm always the last one up at our house. I Sam. And I can tell, I'm usually sitting in my basement either watching TV or, more often than not reading boring books. But I can do that, and if I hear one of the kids get out of their bedroom and go to the restroom, I know which kid it is. I don't have to see them, because I know the sound of them walking in the house. Right? These two had that level of intimacy with God. That they could hear the approach of him coming and be able to discern that from the approach of any of the various animals walking around creation, to be able to discern that between the sound of their spouse approaching them. They knew God so well that they understood when he was approaching them. But this time's different. Because now as they hear the sound of God approaching, they're scared because they've broken a rule. And so they do exactly what every child has ever done when they've done something they know is wrong and they hear mom or dad coming. Verse 8 tells us at the end of it, it says, "And the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden." They hid. We broke the rule. And now God's coming. Maybe if we hide. Up to this point, they had nothing to ever hide from God or try to hide from God. Let's be honest. Every time we try to hide from God, we're hiding in vain. He's God. And God knows something isn't right. Again, he's God. And he calls out to the man asking, where is he? And as a kid, this always kind of bugged me. I'm going to be honest with you. This particular question of God asking, where are you, kind of always bugged me because he's God, right? God's supposed to know. But here's the thing. As I've gotten older and as I've looked into this, I don't think he was asking for himself. Right? I think he was allowing Adam a chance to figure out what happened here. God says, where are you? He's allowing man to have an opportunity to realize what he has just done. It's a heavy moment. As God says, where are you? Adam responds by simply saying, hey, we did something that we shouldn't do. We're hiding because we're naked. And we feel shame because of that. And if you really stop to consider it, the question that God asks in response to Adam's explanation should break your heart. It should. Because the question God asked him is simply, who told you you were naked? Who told you you needed to hide anything? Oh, if that doesn't turn your guts, check for a pulse. God points out exactly what the problem truly was, that they've eaten of the fruit of the tree they told them not to. God gave them one rule. That's it, one. One! And they couldn't follow that. And Adam, in response to this, as God points out exactly what Adam did, Adam does something that is so common. It's something that each and every one of us have done. Probably recently, if we're really willing to be honest with each other. In verse 12 we read, then the man said, the woman whom you gave to me to be with me, she gave me the fruit of the tree, and I ate. Who ate the fruit? Not rhetorical. Who ate the fruit? Yeah, both of them, but that means that Adam ate the fruit, right? Right. He knew what the fruit was. Again, verse 6, he was right there. He knew he's not supposed to. But instead of taking responsibility for his actions, his own choice, instead, he tries to pass the blame. There are exactly 2 people on the earth right now. 2. That's it. And Adam is looking to blame the one. This is worse when we start to think about what we talked about a couple of weeks ago. Because a couple of weeks ago, Adam was by himself. He was alone. so alone that God created Eve specifically for him, and she was such a gift to him. She was such a relief to him that the first time he sees her and recognizes that he has a helper that is suitable to him, a person that he can spend his existence with, he said the words, "At last." A recognition of the beauty of the gift that he has. And now, in the moment that both of them do something wrong, she doesn't matter as much as she did. Because I'm ready to throw her under the bus. The great, tremendous value that she had just a couple of weeks ago that would lead him to say, "At last," she doesn't have that value now. And God turns to Eve and says, "What have you done?" Again, the moment of realization of what has happened here. And Eve does the exact same thing that Adam did. Exact same thing. At the end of verse 13, she says, "The serpent deceived me and I ate." It's not my fault, it's the snake's. Isn't it interesting that our natural inclination every time that we make a mistake in our life, isn't it interesting that every time I make a mistake in my life, my natural inclination is to blame somebody else for it? I kind of hate that. And yet I know the next time I do something stupid, I'm going to look for who I can blame for it. We want to blame those who are immediately around us, a boss who we claim wasn't clear in his directions, a spouse who didn't lay out exactly what we were supposed to do, properly inform us of the situation. We'll blame any number of other people and say it was their fault, not mine. We've talked about this before. We'll probably talk about it again. It's because we're all the hero of our own story. That's how we view ourselves. Like naturally, we view ourselves as being the hero of our own story. And so if something goes wrong, well, it can't be my fault. I'm the hero. We are, after all, creatures of incredible vanity and selfishness. And it has been that way since the very beginning. Isn't that fun? God does address the serpent, but we're going to circle back to that here in a minute because I think we need to understand what has just happened. Because for the first time in all of human history, the very first time man has disobeyed the direct, clear rule of God. Just one. The very first rebellion against God has happened. And now, for the very first time, sin has entered the equation. Innocence is lost forever. And while I believe that God is heartbroken over the betrayal of man, and I genuinely think it has broken his heart. Again, that question, who told you you were naked, should shatter your heart. Even though God is heartbroken over this decision that they have made a choice. And because of that choice, because of that action, there's going to be some consequences. And oh man, are there consequences. We read about him in verses 16 through 19. It says to the woman, he said, "I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." To Adam he said, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In," and here's the first time this word is used, "pain You shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat of the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. The consequences of the choice that the two of them have made are going to affect all of creation. Now, they're going to learn what pain is. Now they're going to learn what it means to work, to eat. And now, they're going to face death. One stupid, insignificant moment as they bit down on the forbidden fruit is going to set off a ripple effect that has since been felt by every single person since. We experience pain because of two people biting into a fruit. Isn't that dumb? We have to eventually say goodbye to the ones that we love the most because two people couldn't say no when they needed to. I've been seeing a lot of memes and stuff. I don't know why. I just have been. Maybe it's because the algorithm knows what I'm preaching about now. But I'm seeing a lot of memes on my social media phases and stuff, and it's like all these, the first moment in heaven, everybody looks at Adam and Eve and it's just, yep. Because of the choices of two people, every single one of us have to live with that. Man, that drives me nuts. But I think it goes to show the amount of how our choices affect other people, because it's one of the most unfortunate realizations that we always make far too late. That our choices have consequences, that our actions have consequences, that every decision that we make throughout the day has consequences that are likely not going to affect just us. Consequences that we do not think about in the first place. Consequences that even if we do think about them, we couldn't possibly have foreseen that consequence. And far too often, we make decisions in the moment that have effects on not just our lives, but on the lives of everyone around us. And when those effects are negative, because they're always negative, it seems like, even when you try to make the right choice, you still make the wrong one. When we have to face the consequences of our disastrous choice, we will oftentimes ask ourselves, if God really loves me, then why do I have to go through this? It's one of the main questions that we ask as human beings, isn't it? If God is all loving, then why does this happen? Or why did that have to take place? Or why did this happen to this person that I care about? Understand, we have the audacity to ask God, why are you making me face the consequences of my own choices? Aren't people awesome? The reality of the situation is something that we don't want to face, that we have simply made a poor choice. And because of the poor choice that we have made, we are not immune to the consequences of our actions. And we will always do everything that we can to throw the blame onto somebody else other than ourselves. It was their fault that this happened. I didn't want to do it, but so-and-so pressured me into it. The devil made me do it. And when we face the consequences of our own actions, we somehow believe that God should somehow spare us from the pain of our own choices. Let me put it this way to you. We want to have the freedom to break the rules, but we want to be spared the consequences for that choice. This is the heart of our selfishness and vanity that every single one of us carry. That we want to have the freedom to break the rule. We just don't want to face the consequence when we do. We can't have it both ways. We can't. We can't expect to live with the freedom to choose for ourselves whether or not to follow the rules and then expect that somehow we'll be spared of the consequences when we choose not to. Adam and Eve had one rule, one, and they broke it. And because of that, there were consequences. Every rule in our lives has a consequence to it. If you break the law of this land, you're going to face the consequence of being arrested. Or at the very least, ticketed. If you break the rule of God, you're likely going to face a consequence to it. But let me ask you this. Why does God give us rules in the first place? And my response to that is, why does any father give his children rules? It's to protect us. To protect us so we don't have to face the consequence when we choose to break that rule. Doesn't it make it even sillier that every time that we do break those rules, we sit there and wonder, God, why didn't you stop this consequence from happening to me? I gave you the rule. That's why it's there. Don't run in the house with your socks on so that this doesn't happen to you. Don't eat that fruit so that this doesn't happen. Don't do that. Don't look at that. Don't go over there. Don't talk to that person so that this doesn't happen. When we start to look at the law of God and we start to look at it as a father giving rules to prevent consequence, we look at the law, especially in the Old Testament, and we're going to be talking about those laws the rest of this year, so sorry. But we always look at the Bible, we say, this is so restrictive. I can't do this, I can't do that. Well, yeah, because when you do that, what happened? When we stop looking at them as restrictions that God places on them and instead look at them as rules given to us by a loving Father to protect us from the consequences of making those choices, I think it changes the way that we view the Old Testament Scripture. At least it should. Because when we know that the heart of God is that he loves us, it changes the way that we look at it. But understand, when Adam and Eve bit into that fruit, it changed absolutely everything, because for the first time ever, it created something that was never supposed to exist between God and man. Separation. A holy God cannot exist around unholy sin. Easy for me to say, right? A holy God cannot exist with unholy sin. So it created a separation between God and man that has existed to this very day. And yet there was something that God said as he talked to the serpent, the instigator. Understand, the snake did not force open their mouths and force them to eat it. They did that of their own choice. But the serpent was the one who gave them the temptation in the first place. As God talks to the serpent in verse 15, he talks about something incredible. He says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head. You shall bruise his heel. We know in this narrative that the serpent is who? Satan. The great deceiver, the enemy himself. Right? It's pretty clear that that's who this is. And yet, understand, in verse 15, God has just now felt the separation between himself and man. Just now. But that last part right there, of her offspring bruising the head of the snake, in some interpretations it actually says the word, he will crush your head. and you will bruise his heel. Nearly every biblical scholar that you can find indicates that this is the very first prophecy of a coming Messiah. Do you understand what this means? God has just now felt separation between him and man, and so he enacts a plan to fix that right away. This is how much God loves us as human beings, is at the instant he feels the separation between God and himself, or himself and man, he says, you know what? I'm going to put a plan in place to one day fix this whole thing. It's not going to come easy, right? Because we know that this is going to culminate into the cross of Jesus Christ, that the Son of God himself is going to have to come to this earth, put on flesh, so that he can die in our place, because the ultimate end result of all sin is death itself. And so in order for sin to be absolved, something or someone has to die. So God, the minute he feels separation with his most loved creation, he puts a plan in place to one day be able to fix that separation entirely. If that doesn't show you that God loves us, at the moment, the instant we mess up, we break the one rule and create separation, God says, I can't deal with this. I don't like this. I want them back. And so he talks about the day when an offspring of Eve will crush the head of the great deceiver himself, even though it's going to result in him having his heel bruised. Isn't that beautiful? You know why that's beautiful? Because the love of a father for his child is always beautiful. That God would love us so very much that he cannot stand to feel separation between him and us. And so one day, one man is going to come, and he is going to suffer the consequences for the choice of one man. Paul would write about this in Romans chapter 5, verses 18 and 19, and we will close with it. It says, therefore, as one trespass led to the condemnation for all men, so one act of righteousness leads to the justification and life for all men. For as by the one man's disobedience the many were made sinners, so by the one man's obedience the many will be made righteous.